Hitler came to power in 1933, planning to conquer all of Europe. Plans had already been made. And within 6 years after coming to power, he had an army that was capable of conquering almost the entire continent of Europe, west of Russia. Blitzkrieg, tanks and planes, the things that had been denied Germany in the Treaty of Versailles were his priorities. And the British and the French understood what the bigger problem was in the future when they drew the line at Poland. And after Hitler had annexed a lot of territories, knew that Poland was the next on the list in 1939 and declared war on Germany when Poland was invaded. The British and the French thought that war that we now know as World War II was going to be a replay of World War I, fought in a defensive mode. The French had constructed something called the Maginot Line, this enormous border fortification intended to try to stop the Germans and fight a war that was a static war. And when you're in a defensive mode, you always need fewer soldiers than if you're on the offense. So the British also sent in the British Expeditionary Force alongside the French, not realizing that Blitzkrieg is going to completely bypass these fortifications. And the British and the French in the summer of 1940 found themselves in a very desperate situation. The northern part of France got occupied by the German army. The southern part of France was a client state, the Vichy French regime, that provided some support for the German operations elsewhere. But the British and the French left in the Dunkirk evacuation about 250,000, 300,000 men evacuated across the Channel to see combat later in the war. So that was critical, for the future of the war. From Hitler's perspective, he wanted to take Britain out. It's called Operation Sea Lion. He was going to try his own version of an amphibious invasion to take Britain out once he realized that Churchill, when he was in office replacing Neville Chamberlain, vowed to use the resources of the British Empire against the Nazi Empire. Made all kinds of allusions in Churchill's speeches to the new dark age that would descend upon Europe if the Germans didn't repudiate Hitler or Hitler didn't get defeated in battle. By the end of 1940, Hitler had taken over most of Europe west of Russia. And along the coastline of France, he set up something called the Atlantic Wall defenses with a lot of bunkers and cannons facing seaward in order to try to fend off any potential Allied invasion. The Allies knew that there had to be an invasion of Western Europe. Prior to 1944, there had been an invasion of North Africa, of Sicily, of Italy, and that had the effect of drawing German defenders away from the French coast farther to the south. And by the summer of 1944, the time was right for Operation Overlord. That's the American, British, and Canadian drive to break through the Atlantic Wall, move into France, and then towards Germany. It was 132,500 men involved in that. So that made that the biggest amphibious operation in world history. 57,000 of those men were Americans who happened to have the unfortunate luck of landing at one of the most heavily defended places in Normandy, Omaha Beach. The Les Moulins defenses there are very formidable and were not taken out by pre-landing bombardment, so it made the casualties very high there. The entire operation was overwhelmingly successful, but at a great cost. Normandy was essential. It was absolutely essential. It was the beginning of the end of the Third Reich. It was the nail in the coffin, the first of the nails that led to the end of that war. Mark, can you tell us about the Longest Yarn project and its genesis?
The Longest Yarn project started last year in Normandy by two friends who were inspired by both their English and Irish families' history in the Second World War and having lost an uncle who was a Lancaster pilot in Europe, to my father, Harry Kolkowitz, who lied about his age and was on Utah Beach on June 6, 1944. My friends Mike and Tansy, for the last 20 years since they've moved from England to Normandy have had a host of German, American, French, all different families, peoples, walks of life in commemoration of D-Day, which was the greatest liberation of the world and something that was monumental for America and its allies. The project is 80 panels, each of which are 4 feet long, that have all been knitted and crocheted by people from over 10 different countries, involving hundreds of hours of handwork. Everything is done by hand. And each panel, where there's 80, represents the 80 days of the liberation of Normandy, starting in June 6th, or right before that, from England, Portsmouth, and Southampton, to Normandy, Utah Beach, Juno Beach, Omaha Beach, Sword, Gold, all the way to Paris, because The Longest Yarn, which was the classic movie about D-Day, which was done in the early 1960s, people took different panels and stitched the scene from The Longest Day, it's called The Longest Yarn, and they've all been authenticated and vetted by historians. And the reason this is so important is that all the people who have been knitting and crocheting have a personal, emotional relationship with either someone or their family or their mother, father, grandparents. They have a reason to never want to forget the monumental efforts of the free world to save us from Hitler.
Mark, can you tell us about the popularity of the Longest Yarn project in Europe?
I'd be very happy to. 5 years ago, there was no Longest Yarn. Even though the battle for D-Day, this is the 80th anniversary, the Longest Yarn is done because of people in England who moved to Normandy who felt a loss from all the veterans that they've known for the last 20 years, that they've cultivated, come from America or Scotland or England or Ireland or Holland or Belgium, wherever, to come celebrate their grandparents or their parents or the liberation of Normandy every year. And what happens there is like nothing that I've ever seen. The people are so grateful that they turn out by the thousands. And when the American army, basically at the end of the Second World War, or when they left Normandy, left all their equipment behind. So everywhere in Normandy, you find some tanks, some trucks, some jeeps. You find every different color of every different car of military vehicles, including some Germans and different French freedom fire trucks. It's because they want to remember what they're very familiar. They love their families. And I've never seen anything in my life where everybody, it's their Christmas. The whole world stops to celebrate the freeing of the country and the idea that they remember their grandparents and who they helped and the fact that they were going to be free again. And it's quite amazing because I've never in my life experienced people who every year say, thank you, Father, we love you. And even the Germans come in and say, we're on the wrong side, but thank you for destroying Hitler. And part of D-Day every year is the idea that people should live in peace and harmony. And these 80 panels represent the history of the invasion in Normandy from England on June 6th or 5th, all the way through the liberation of Paris. And each scene was done by someone who felt some passion or some feeling about the panels, including the panel that's done from my father, who was a radio intercept operator in Normandy.
That's fascinating, Mark. It really is. It reminds me of the story of the Bayeux Tapestry in the Middle Ages, justifying the Norman invasion of England. Panels that in particular speak to you?
Yes. The Bayeux tapestries are amazing that they were done 1,000 years ago. And the panels now that were just done were by volunteers, by people from over 10 different countries. All the panels mean different things to different people. Another panel, which is very important to me, is When I went to Normandy this year, there was 3 women who all were children in Wayville in Normandy and remember the liberation of the town by the Americans. And they all had a love affair with my father. You know, they say, voulez-vous coucher con moi, or whatever. You know, will you sleep with me? And it's just something, again, the people do not want to give up the idea that the world was made a better place. And the reason that I'm so involved with it is that I want to believe that the greatest generation, the people who fought for the freedom of the world, that's the kind of world that hopefully at some point we can obtain again and make that generation proud, and that we maintain our decency and good feelings towards the world.
History can be told in so many different ways. And the idea that there can be a tapestry in modern times to reflect on something so large, and that you have family connections to this. How does that make you feel?
Very, very proud and very emotional, because I'm in the restaurant business, and every once in a while somebody will come in with a World War II veteran's hat or Korea, and just to be able to talk to them and say, where were you and how you doing and what's going on? And I've met people in Normandy that went to the same high school as my father in the military, but 50 years later, you know, Christopher Columbus in the Bronx, and the people you meet, it's just an amazing way of breaking down humanity, because everybody's there in friendship and peace. And the Bayeux Tapestries represented for the Normans a chance to be proud of their history and for people to understand where they came from. And this is the 20th century, the greatest battle of Europe of all time, to go forward and say, you know, never to forget, and we want to celebrate.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, Mark, this is coming to the United States,
yes.
Correct? Can you tell us about that?
Sure. This is like, I say to people, I have to give praise to the Blues Brothers, because I'm on a mission from God like they were. And my friends in Normandy, since I've been involved with this project from the get-go, and I believed in it because I've had the proud experience of meeting dozens and dozens of World War II veterans. For 15 years, I had a Battle of the Bulge Club in Cape May, and for years, I've given away my hotel. I have 20 rooms, because these are all people that did for America, and it's just something very, very important, because it's sort of like trying to right the ship to a time where you believe that there were black and white, and it's a morality play, and we all as a nation stood together to defend the fact that we all came from different ethnicities, different realities, speaking different languages, of which I am the same.
That's really, really fascinating, Mark. The idea of this enormous army that we put together in World War II, comprised of all these different backgrounds and ethnicities, and yet coming together as this homogenous thing called G.I. Joe. You know, there is a commemoration on this magnitude of the biggest invasion in human history, undertaken by these anonymous, at that time, individuals. Right. Coming to the United States, what do you think the impact is going to be over here for the descendants of World War II veterans?
My experience so far has been overwhelmingly positive. At this point, I have Rita Rothberg, who's the county clerk in Cape May County, who is a driving force for America, for rights. She's very involved in history. She's an advocate for America, and we've worked together.
I got involved with the Longest Yarn Cape May County because I thought it was perfect for us to show in Cape May County our love of veterans and our love of history. In fact, 80 years ago, on June 6, our soldiers landed on Omaha Beach, and we saved the French people. They are eternally grateful to us for this day. In fact, we're repaying a favor to them because in 1781, the French government sent their navy to aid General Washington and our revolutionaries and enabled us to go ahead and win our independence and freedom from the tyranny of the British government. And we are eternally grateful to the French, and they are eternally grateful to the United States citizens. And for that reason, we thought The Longest Yarn would be a great project for us to become involved with. And so in Cape May County, we are working to bring this exhibit here in 2025. And so we are raising funds to transport this exhibit here, and we're letting people know what this Longest Yarn is all about.
She's gotten the county, the people in charge of the county, to say, we want to be part of this. And the county's already given $5,000 to the Historical Society and then the Department of Tourism. And they've sent this now on to the New Jersey government to say, hey, look what's coming here, because this is coming in April at the Naval Air Station, which is a national historic monument. They were hangars that were used in the Second World War, where over 140 pilots died. They trained a lot more, but died and crashed there. So it's a perfect place to come. And I think that everybody knows somebody that was in the war. And it's something that they should understand, that these people gave everything so that we could be here today. Some were very unlucky and never came home. But the idea that when you can talk to someone and they say, oh, my uncle was in the South Pacific. My Aunt Shirley, she was a nurse. We painted a picture of my friend John Crosby, who was in the Battle of the Bulge, and he's 101. And he knows that they're going to hang it in the restaurant to celebrate. These are the people that I want to be around. It's like it's the Band of Brothers.
Right. So this really can be the American Bayou Tapestry.
Absolutely. Because, from the Louisiana, where they made all the boats that came from the Philadelphia Navy Yard, New York Navy Yard, California, all the steel. You didn't have a choice and say, oh, I'm going to go have pizza tonight, or I'm going to go to the drive-in. This was America's power. And one has to understand that you have to explain to people who are a farmer in Kansas or an auto worker why this is important, because you can't fight a war unless you have a reason to fight. And it's called, you can say, propaganda, but it's like you have to understand, because in America, let's say there's 40 million Germans during the Second World War at that time. In Germany or in Europe, my father said, most people didn't really care about fighting the Germans. Their next door neighbor was German. The Irish guy down the block, he drank their beer, so they might have been mad at them. But my father said what it really changed was Malmedy. Malmedy was the Battle of the Bulge, second or third day, where General Pfeiffer, the German general, had 150 men shot. They surrendered. And my father was there, have pictures of all these men frozen on the ground. That's when the Americans realized it's payback.
Mark, why is Cape May the ideal location for the American premiere of The Longest Yarn?
The ideal location is because there's many, many, many veterans that retired in Cape May County in the last few years. Cape May County has a lot of Philadelphia participants in the military, and having been in Philadelphia for high school and know Philadelphia, Cape May is where I ended up after being in the Army. I think when you look at American history, going back from the Revolutionary War in Williamsburg, Virginia, and the fact that George Washington and the Americans defeated the British Empire, so to speak, in the 1700s, that the East Coast has always been a place where to attack America, you're either going to attack on the East Coast or the West Coast. And the East Coast, in the First World War with Germany, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of ships sunk from South to North Carolina all the way up to Maine because then people couldn't get supplies. The Germans were starving America just like the Union starved the Confederacy back in the Civil War. Cape May is strategically located 100 miles from New York, and you have the Delaware River, which is Cape May is the southernmost part of New Jersey, and the Delaware River empties into the Atlantic Ocean. And just think of it, a submarine or two going up the Delaware River and destroying the Philadelphia Navy Yard, or going all the way up, or Camden, and then going through the Channel and going to Baltimore. You know, so much of our military importance is all around, you know, the Atlantic Ocean, because Germany was that way. So they built towers, war towers. They had military bases all over, including one in Millville, one in Cape May. They had more Navy. They had a lot of different people there. And it's history, and it's still there from 100 years ago. And then if you come to Cape May, you have these war bunkers. And in the war tower, which used to be a fire tower to look out along the Atlantic Ocean, are dozens and dozens of pictures of American veterans from Cape May County from the different wars that took up residence here and are honored there. So it's very important because there's a large military population in Cape May, a majority of whom now would be Vietnam veterans, and afterwards there's very few World War II or Korean veterans, but they find Cape May and the area around there to be a good place to retire. Plus, Cape May is very close to Philadelphia. So everybody that's in the city would like to go and enjoy the sand and the beach. And there's a big presence of military in Cape May, and they can tell their children, grandchildren, by coming to the Naval Air Station now and seeing all the fighter planes from the Second World War. Next door, they have a Vietnam museum. So people can actually try to understand in reality what their parents or grandparents or uncles do. And there's a lot of history going back hundreds of years, because Cape May had its first hotel. I think Congress Hall was around in 1812, which was the battle between Britain and America in 1812. We have a Coast Guard base, the only training facility in America, and they do a lot of search and rescue missions, and they protect the area. And then we have up north by the airport, we have a fighter squadron. As they say in the military, yours is not to question why, yours is just to do or die. And the war or being in the military is not what you see on TV. The military in real life is real life. And if you get shot on TV, you'll come back next week in a different role. When you go in the military and your role is to protect what your mission, and the guy next to you is your buddy, you're giving up your life to someone, whether they black, white, or blue. And I think Cape May, for many years with the Veterans Association, the American Legions, and people who live there, they need a place to celebrate the fact that they all went to do what only 3 or 4% of Americans have ever done, which is to answer the call for their country.
Mark, what would you want people to come away with after viewing The Longest Yarn?
I think for many people, it's a chance of a lifetime, because this tapestry, not a tapestry really, this crocheted and knitted 3D piece will only be in Cape May for April to September. And then we hope to bring it to Washington or Philadelphia, maybe the World Museum or Fort Bragg, because the idea behind all of this is I have it for a year, and we want to bring it to places so that Cape May in Friendship can become a twin city with Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with Carentan and Cape May County because it's like the friendship that we have, just as we honor the French in the Revolutionary War for helping us defeat the English. Times have changed, and it's only going to be there a little bit of time. It's like going to see something in Philadelphia that comes to a museum and then goes somewhere else. Most people might never get to Normandy, might never get a chance to see the work of hundreds of people who have spent thousands of hours crocheting and knitting different scenes, which for most of them are very intimate scenes because they did that scene because there's somebody in there that represents somebody that they knew. And there's also a book that's now in its second printing that was written very quickly by Tansy Foster and has a picture of the display and then a picture of the artist. And it tells a little bit, a snippet about who they were and why they did it. And it was so important in Carentan that they sold out. And they said, now we have to put it in French as well, because people are really realizing my Uncle Pierre was here or Joe was here. And it's ephemeral. It won't be here forever. And it's something that I'm very honored that people who have spent the last year working on it and all these different countries, that it's coming to Cape May to honor us, honor America, honor France and all the veterans. And if you miss it, it's gone.
Mark, can you tell us how the longest yarn was constructed and what the panels represent?
It's a very interesting question. From a very personal side, when you grow up in America as a child of a World War II veteran, you become interested in your father's story or your uncle's story or your cousin's story. And the movie in 1963 by Daryl Zanuck, The Longest Day, is considered the quintessential film about the invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. And since you have so many moving parts, you've got the French, the Irish, the English, the Germans, you've got airplanes, submarines, you got cannons, you got tanks, you got flamethrowers, you've got thousands of cows, you've got flooded farmlands. You've got things that in the movie, they make you believe, oh my God, is this real? And what The Longest Yarn does is takes the vignettes of The Longest Day and made it into The Longest Yarn from different scenes in the movie that were authenticated by historians. And most of the panels were done by people who have a personal interest. So it's not, it's reality, but somebody can look at it and say, like, there's one panel which General McAuliffe told the German translator who came the white flag and said, if you surrender in the next half hour, we have all of Bastogne surrounded by elite German troops, we'll make nice. And General McAuliffe, who didn't speak German, told his German translator to say Nussen, which means nuts, which really means, go to hell. Because the German general had no idea when they translated to Nussen, because people were polite. But General McAuliffe was in Carentan at the center square, which has been there for hundreds of years. And the Americans had just defeated Germans in that area. The Germans were further out, closer to Saint-Lô. But military pieces, projectiles can go very far. And General McAuliffe and all the commanders and the squadrons were around the town square. And this young girl and her mother came up to General McAuliffe and gave the general a bunch of flowers. 3 minutes later, a German shell came over, killed the girl, killed all these people in Carentan. And that's one of the scenes that they knitted. And to make it even more interesting, this year, one of the veterans who comforted the girl who died and the mother came back to Carentan and met the mother of the daughter. If that doesn't get you emotional. So all these scenes represent one scene of all these cows lying down in a field, because there were thousands of cows. Normandy's cows, cheese, milk, Calvados, and wine. And that's all you need to know. But every hedgerow, and there are thousands of them, you cannot see behind the hedgerow. And 10,000 soldiers were killed, they say, because of hedgerows. The Germans you couldn't see through them. So my father's there on the opening of D-Day, and he also had a film at the Colville-sur-Mer. He's there, he's with his Tommy gun. He doesn't know where the hell he is. He's in a field. He's with his guys. They don't know anything going on. And he hears, oh, oh. And my father says, stop, identify yourself. Oh. And he just, at that point, he took his Tommy gun and went through the hedgerow, just annihilated. Everybody stood up that night, fixed bayonets, machine guns, M1s, all ready. The next morning, they went over to see what my father shot at. He killed a cow. So they have these pictures of these different stories. Or there's another panel where people who were still alive in the town remember the liberation by Americans. And each panel has significance so people can do what they're related to. So this brings people to say, oh, my father wasn't in Normandy, but he was in the Battle of the Bulge. Or my Uncle Joe, he went to the South Pacific. But it is that this is a possibility for people to see the history, and maybe it'll get people thinking about what these people were doing. Their average age was 17. And at 17, they were going somewhere that they never heard of. And I think it's a story that for America is a thing is people should see what the peoples did. They gave up everything, some forever, so that we could be here today.
Hi and welcome to The Longest Yarn. So number one is showing the two coasts. You can see the coast of France here. That's Cherbourg at the top, where my finger is pointing, coming round to the plage of the Débarquement there. And then over the other side is the UK, with the Isle of Wight in the middle. That is where Piccadilly took place, where all the ships gathered, 4,000 ships, before they came across to France. The next one, panel number 2, is called Ici Londres, which is showing the radio with some spilt wine, etc. And this is just showing about the Free French having radio in London, broadcasting in French to the French, helped by the BBC. You have a box of matches and Gaulois cigarettes on the table here. Following on round here, we then go to Rommel, And Rommel's with his cohort, who's showing him the map of the forthcoming storm. Rommel's there with his shoes under his arm, making the decision as to whether or not he can go. And the weather forecast is saying he can go. The next one is the weather forecast, is the weather map, with Stagg pointing out the depression. But it wasn't Stagg who spotted the storm first time round. It was a young lady called Maureen Flavin in Ireland. We then head on to Southwark House, where we've got the top secret maps hidden away and the outside being guarded ferociously by various people. Southwark actually has a funny story, in as much as that when the carts were actually unveiled and it showed that the invasion was going to take place into Normandy, the man that delivered them was held prisoner until the invasion actually took place. This here is a double panel showing Cannington, a village in Dorset, where Yeo Dairy is. And this is being made by panel makers, the creators in Cannington themselves, with stories from that time. The little boy in red there is grabbing sweeties off the soldier as they're pulling out the town. And he remembered that. And then we've got the tents all in the village square with washing out on the lines, etc. Life was turned upside down. 5 of these soldiers on here were killed on Utah Beach. We're then depicting what's happening over in France again. This is the before the bombs start landing, they throw out all the leaflets in French and in German trying to frighten the German army to retreat. Come on then to what's happening all around the coast. This is the LST loading onto the ship. The tanks go on backwards, so when they arrive onto the beach, they come out the right direction. Men loading onto the ships, marching soldiers, we call this one. And then we come on to number 11, which is the pretty girl trying to distract the German soldiers away from their surprise in the hay cart, which is the 2 RAF pilots. This is telling the story of Caen Prison, where 2 of these airmen were shot in the massacre. Over 70 people were killed on the 6th of June with a massacre. Paratroopers loading on the ships, on the gliders in England. That's self-explanatory. Then we're coming back to France again, where we have the beach scenes with the forced labour and slave labour. Camps as far as the eye can see, especially around the New Forest area, where the camps were disguised under the trees. Thus we've got some lovely trees there. Loading equipment, all the equipment is being loaded on. And in this one you can see the little chap taking his French lesson, another one having a crafty fag over there. So this is just depicting how busy all the docks, etc. were. The mini-subs, so this is Operation Gambit in the UK, and this is explaining about how the mini-subs were towed out to sea, waited out at sea for nearly 5 days, only coming up now and again for fresh air. And then when they heard the ship's engines, they surfaced, put the beacons up and waved the flags to mark the way. Boredom on the ships, this is very much from The Longest Day movie, but they're playing crap, reading their books, reading letters from home, etc., stuck on the ships until they can set sail. Let's Go is Eisenhower, Stagg, and all the merry men making the actual decision as to whether or not they can go for the invasion. This is the 7th meeting in 24 hours over the weather map. And then we have Rupert. Rupert was a fake dummy parachutist that came down and exploded everywhere. And then as well as that, they used the clicker click once, click twice back for as friends. So this is depicting these sort of things that were used. Pathfinders loading up, checking each other's equipment, ready to go on as the first ones to land in France. And we move over. This is the church that we're actually in. You can see the altar. And then we come over to Jean as a long moustache. This is depicting when the moment comes, where it comes on the radio. Jean as a long moustache. That was his code for getting out there to do his duty. Brixham Harbour, which is again depicting all the loading up going on the harbours. Aircraft as far as the eye can see. The air was black with aircraft. Ships as far as the eye can see, which is again showing all the ships coming over. Parachutists landing at night, because the first parachutists came down before dawn broke, and this is showing them coming in. And then we have the overview of Pegasus Bridge, a plane towing a glider with other gliders on the ground and the bridge in the background there. And then we have a close-up of Pegasus Bridge being the battle for Pegasus Bridge. You have your commandos and what have you here, but underneath the bridge you've got 3 or 4 guys taking out the dynamite there. And just round the corner we have the resistance blowing up the trains, distraction tactics going on. And then where parachutists are starting to land all over. This is St Mary Glees, the parachutists landing through the greenhouse, which is showing the normality of it all. And then over here we have St Mary Glees with the presbytery on fire, the villagers all out trying to put the fire out, and the parachutists and chaos all around as the parachutists come in, and the German soldiers there organising the people to put the fire out and shooting the parachutists. Mein Gott, we call this. This is Puskat in his bunker. The dog is the other side of it, and this is him seeing the invasion actually coming in. Parachutists everywhere and dead cows. 200,000 cows were killed on D-Day. So just to give you a sense of what actually went on. We then come to, this is taken out of the movie The Longest Day again. This is troops passing each other. The Americans go in one direction and the Germans go in the other way without seeing each other. In actual fact, this did used to happen in the theatre of war at times. Operation Neptune, ships opening fire where the bombardment came in. And this is starting to show, in actual fact, the loss to civilian life. More civilians in Normandy were killed than soldiers. Omaha landing, showing the swirling seas and the buff that they had to climb up, just to give an example of how difficult it all was. This is Omaha Beach, showing Corporal Woodson, who was a medic who was wounded in his buttock, and he fought courageously on the beach, saving people's lives, ignoring his own injuries. We then come on to Utah Beach, where they're all coming ashore there. USS Texas, which is a major ship, very involved in the bombardment as well. But to get the projectile high enough, they had to lift the ship by almost 5 degrees. This here is showing what that is doing. And then we have Juno Beach here, a really action-packed scene. But on here, we've managed to put in a little motorcyclist. Sorry, we've got a reflection there. There he is, the little motorcyclist. This is actually Donald Shepard. He is now 102, and this is the first year that he couldn't get to Normandy for the actual anniversary, so we put him in. This here is Gull Beach. The battle on Gull Beach was particularly difficult and hard. The Royal Marines were involved in that as well. Mulberry Harbour relief map showing the actual Mulberry Harbour. And then we come across to Sword Beach with Piper Bill Millen actually jumping out of the landing craft. Now, Piper Millen is knitted out of the wool from his actual jumper his son donated to us, which we unravelled. And in the book that I've done, I've actually used Bill Millen's actual words description of him landing on the beach and his kilt coming up like a tutu all round him in the freezing cold water. This one is a little bit tongue-in-cheek in as much as that it possibly did sort of happen, but this is more borrowed from the movie again, and this is showing Bill Millen again, knitted with some of his jumper, Lord Lovat and the Mayor of Colville greeting him in full battle. This was knitted by one woman on her own. There we have soldiers on the foxholes, soldiers digging in and fighting their battle. Point to Hock, which was an incredibly tough battle. A lot of these rangers did training in Northern Ireland for this. And then we have Piper Bill Millen and Lord Lovat coming across Pegasus Bridge. They've relieved the guys. This is beautifully done. And then the only VC on D-Day, which was Stanley Hollis. Again, the full description is in the book, but this is a marvellous portrayal of that. Snipers in the church, this is called. Virtually every church tower had a sniper, and this is depicting what was going on in all the little villages and towns with snipers, etc. Here we have the 47 Commando Royal Marines landing on Gold Beach. Now these guys then, after this particularly wicked battle on the beach here, they then yomped round to Port-en-Bessin in their wet woolen uniforms and proceeded to have a huge battle where they were very badly outnumbered. I'm glad to say that they won. Then we come on to the casino at Ouistreham. Again, this is a little bit where we're taking a little bit of a liberty. The casino was actually demolished before this actually took place, but it is a good way of showing Kiefer and his commandos. They actually trained in a place called Crickeith in Wales, and the Crickeith creators have made this panel. There is a plaque up about Kiefer and his commandos on the seafront at Crickeith. The nuns appearing to assist everybody. Now this comes from, we think, the nuns in Caen as during the bombardment, and the civilians all hid in the churches and the nuns were helping them there. John Wayne comes into Saint-Mère-Église, that's him over there. It's actually Van der Voort, but that was the part that John Wayne played in the film. Then we have the horses that were liberated by the airborne, and they galloped around in between the various battalions looking for people and what have you. Omaha Beach, showing the actual severity of the battle. It was pretty gruesome and a huge loss of life and injuries. Equipment pouring onto the beaches, where we have the bulldozers and everything there, and if you look carefully, you've got the little guy looking into the chest for his ammunition and what have you. The attention to detail in this one is fantastic. We come on to the journalists now, and if you look carefully, you have a chap with his typewriter typing away. He's got his pigeons there, ready to go. And this woman here is the only woman that landed on the 6th of June. Women did not come across to Normandy until the 14th. But this woman is actually Ernest Hemingway's wife, and she hid on one of the ships, came ashore and ended up as a stretcher bearer. But round here, you've got Kappa taking the very famous photograph of the guy stuck in the hedgehog. So then we come to Harry Kulkowitz, being the veteran that stayed with us for over 16 years. Harry landed on Utah Beach on the 6th of June, third wave, and Harry was a radio operator and went right the way through to Bastogne. This is the sort of thing that he would have had to do with his his guys getting hold of the wires and what have you and tapping in. The big guns of Breakhall Manor, if you look carefully in there, you can see the big gun hidden away in the trees. That was another particularly gruesome situation, as this was firing down on Utah Beach, so it was really necessary to capture this one, which the Band of Brothers, if you look at part 3, is there. We're coming on back round on ourselves again, and here we have Dead Man's Corner, which is called Dead Man's Corner because of this guy hanging out the tank. This is the main road up from Utah Beach down to Carentan. Particular importance to take it. The house had Germans in there. Anyway, the guy was shot in his tank. He was a lieutenant, and the radio messages got shorter and shorter. It started off with the dead man hanging out the tank on the corner to the dead guy, and then eventually to Dead Man's Corner. It lasted nearly 3 days. We could then come to Angleville-au-Plain, which is the first aid station that took place. If you look carefully there, you can see lots of blood and gore, and to this day there are blood stains on the pews in this little tiny church. 57 inhabitants in Angleville-au-Plain at the time. They treated in excess of 80 people. It didn't matter if they were German or American, but they all had to leave their guns outside while the medics treated them, and one child from the village. This is depicting gliders everywhere, and if you look carefully, you can see little cows hidden away there, because the cows then sort of took advantage of the wings and what have you and hid under them. Here we have the soldiers starting to arrive from Utah Beach to Saint-Marie-du-Mont, which was the first village liberated on the 6th of June, depicting the airborne covering the railway lines between Carentan and Cherbourg. This is the LSTs delivering more tanks to the beach. This is the Battle of Carentan, coming up to what's called Purple Heart Lane. If you look carefully there, you've got your little guy there. He's got his helmet on his bayonet to see if anybody's out there is going to shoot him. But this was particularly difficult because they had 6 rivers to cross, and it was very, very tough battle. Just further on down from Purple Heart Lane, you had what's now called the Cabbage Patch. And the Cabbage Patch, in the end, Cole did the last bayonet charge in modern warfare. And look carefully there, you can see they've got the bayonets out and ready to go. But this is still used in military schools. Depicting dead horses everywhere, horses and cattle. 200,000 cattle, 8,000 horses were killed on D-Day. Saint-Marie-du-Mont was the first village declared as liberated, and the villagers come out to welcome the troops up. So it's starting to become a happy place. Carentan station was really badly damaged and hit, and you've got the railway lines all ripped up. This is the first field hospital just near Utah Beach. This is the Chateau Colombier, and if you look at the back there under the arches, you can see the German cases and what have you. You've got a guy there on his drip. So this is so from the first aid station, the more badly hurt were taken to the field hospital, and then from the field hospital they were shipped back from Utah Beach back to England. This is depicting jeeps. 17,000 jeeps a month used to come through Normandy. Then we have all signs lead to Paris and Saint-Lô, just showing where they are. Now this is interesting because this is the temporary cemetery in Blowville. Now Blowville is just very close to here. 6,000 were buried here, and there were quite a few of these temporary cemeteries. This one at Blowville housed 6,000. So what they did was they painted the names onto the shrouds, kept the dog tags, and kept extremely good records. The German prisoners of war were utilised to actually dig the graves. This is showing the Kübelwagen, which is the German version of the Jeep. The Kübelwagen is liberated by the 101st in Carentan. And then just round the corner from where we're stood in this church is the square. And here they had a parade. And this little girl that's depicted here, within 2 minutes of her handing the flowers to the medic that's come up from Angleville-aux-Plaines, she's dead. An artillery round came in and killed her and 19 other people. She died in the arms of the medic. And then here, this is actually a true photograph of in our village. For the 65th anniversary, we were asked to put together a book, and my husband asked all the local people, have you got any photographs? And these wall photographs came out, and we decided to knit this one in. This little girl here in the blue, Paulette, still lives in our village. She's 93 now. And then over here, we have one of the final panels is the one from depicting Sonlo. And that baby there was born in Sonlo. 95% of Sonlo was absolutely demolished in the amount of Allied bombing. This baby was born, and he today is the priest at Sainte Mère Église. And finally, we have the helmet falling on the sand.